me welcome you. My name is Van Hayden. I'm a filmmaker. I got my start. I'm from here, uh, University of Minnesota, almost alum. And I got my start when I went out to work with Spike Lee back in 1989 on the movie Mo Better Blues. And for the last 31 years, I've mostly worked as a writer and as a first assistant director in film and television. We have a wonderful, august panel that I'll introduce, and if you say just a little bit about your background and your field of endeavors. I'll just go left to right with E.G. Bailey. E.G.
Yes, my name is E.G. Bailey, and I'm a interdisciplinary artist, primarily working in film, theater, and spoken word, but have done as many art forms as I can. Filmmaking has always been my final destination and my sometimes secret, now overt passion. Yeah, I always say anything and everything I can do with film every day is that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Excellent. All right, Bianca Rhodes.
Hello, everyone. I'm not muted, right? I'm just making sure. You can hear me? Everyone
We
can hear me?
hear you.
Cool. All right. My name is Bianca Rhodes, and I am a TV producer, filmmaker, and photographer, proud Black Minnesotan in media. It's been over 20 years. My media career started when I was 14 over at TPT Television with Don't Believe the Hype. And it has always been my passion since then, from learning it to teaching it, and now a lot of advocacy for like photographers, journalists, production crew, really making sure that people of color have opportunities to be in production, to be in film. I really am passionate about having full crews of people of color or full all women crews. And that's something that I truly enjoy and can honestly say that I do often. And so that's pretty much a lot of my work right now is production and advocacy. I am the production manager at St. Paul Neighborhood Network. And I'm very proud of the work that I've done and continue to advocate for people of color.
Excellent. Local legend, Robin Hickman.
Yes.
Robin Hickman-Winfield, I should add.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Yes, it took 56 years to get that hyphenated name. So let's do that. Yes, proud of fifth generation Minnesotan. And I say that because it's important, because we've been here a long time, and that's important to me. Have loved media making since I was very, very young, and at a young age was groomed to take my rightful place in the making and the telling of our stories, and started young, grabbing hold of the weapon of the camera. In a community-based organization that my father, Bobby Hickman, co-founded with other people in the community, the Inner City Youth League. And I'm going to talk, I know later, about the importance of having community-based media art centers. We got to get back to that. Started at a young age and had the vision of going to Howard University to major in communications. And so started very young as a media maker, inspired by my great uncle, Gordon Parks, who planted those seeds young. Take your rightful place behind the camera. So following in his footsteps, became a media maker and had a long career in public broadcasting, worked for in television and film, HBO, TPT as an executive producer. Again, always making sure that young people took the rightful place behind the camera, and I can now bask in the glow of award-winning producers like Bianca and others, but very, very important, but fighting, uncompromising about us taking our rightful place behind the camera. And so I'm the executive producer and CEO of Soul Touch Productions, and now more than ever, it's just so important that we are positioned and uncompromising about taking our rightful place in the industry, which is the theme of this discussion. So I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation today.
Excellent. Just a couple housekeeping notes, if you will. We're gonna, after the introductions, we're gonna get into the situation where we find ourselves in right now. We'll have some back and forth with the panelists, and then toward the end, we will want to invite questions. So if people can use the question button. I want to introduce Melodie Bahan from the film board. Melodie is instrumental in setting up this panel discussion today. I'd just like her to, Melodie, if you'll unmute yourself, just introduce yourself and just give a little background about the film board, film and TV board.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melodie. I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Film and TV since 2017. The Minnesota Film and TV is Minnesota's state film office. We advocate for the industry in the state, promote the state as a location, provide resources when we can and information, and we administer the state's incentive program, such as it is currently.
Excellent. And Melodie, what was the inspiration for this panel that you set up today?
Wow. Well, this conversation about race, discrimination, disparities is one that has been happening for generations. But after the murder of George Floyd, it, as all of you know, it became a wider conversation. And because our industry, the film and television production industry, particularly here in Minnesota, is so white-centric, white-focused, white-run, I thought it was important that we have this conversation within our community about the issues that specifically impact this industry. So that was kind of the impetus for having this.
Excellent. Well, yes, and I think what Melodie said is very important, that this is not a new conversation. I think all of the panelists would attest to that. You know, I was born here in Minneapolis. I grew up in Duluth, moved back here to go to the U before I went on and started my career in film. Before that, I worked as a journalist, was one of the editors at the Minnesota Daily. I worked at New York Newsday. I worked at the Philadelphia Daily News as a reporter, and at the Associated Press. So, you know, having grown up here, like three of our panelists have done, you know, I think we've sort of taken for granted what I would call this, I don't know if it's a myth, but it's not as inclusive as we'd like it to be, but this idea of Minnesota exceptionalism.
No, right.
Robin, you want to say a little bit on that?
Well, you know, this is the land of the great Hubert Humphrey, then the land of the great Paul Wellstone. Two extraordinary, I really truly believe authentic men, believing in humanity, truly. I remember Robert Townsend alluding to in Hollywood Shuffle, Minnesota, the promised land, right? The North Star. And that was lifted up for a reason. And many of us say, don't believe the hype. There's something very serious about kind of that facade of the promised land. And it's time that we speak to it. I mean, I sit here being reminded of 50 years ago when the Kerner Commission report was done and brought upon us, was a result of the riots and unrest 50 years ago. And the Kerner Commission report findings were that because of the lack of diversity in these various industries of media and entertainment, that there needed to be diversity in newsrooms. And so now here we are again, 50 years later. And so it's very timely, but I don't want to have this discussion 10 years later or 5 years later. And so just to, it's time, and it's time to ensure. I mean, I remember when the Kerner Commission was out and we had around the country, that's why public television came about, because the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was, hey, that was a mandate. Create a system, educational television, that was public television's thing, but then it turned to create opportunities for communities of color to come into the stations and create opportunities for them to tell their stories and have a platform for the storytelling of their communities. And I remember here in St. Paul, it was Black Voices. My father and others in the community came together, and I was a little girl watching that happen and saying, one day I want to work for public television, not the movies, not the networks. I want to work for public television. So I had a vision of possibilities. And then voila, that's what I did. But I made sure when I made it, I recruited the young people from the community to be right there, taking their rightful place, not just even in front of the camera, but they were behind the camera as well. They knew how to write proposals to get the money to make the television, right? And so we've lived some of the answers we see, but I don't want to see another 50 years. Let's really make sure we do it right this time.
E.G., let me bring E.G. in on this. E.G., Robin touched on a really critical and important point, our images in the media. Can you elaborate? Why is that so important?
Well, I mean, visual representation and visual symbolism is so powerful. I mean, that's part of why film is so powerful. You can shape people's minds and people's thinking through the visual medium and through film. Film is never really subjective, even documentaries. I mean, that goes back to Nanu of the North, and it was all subjective. It was what the creator was trying to get the audience to understand and feel. I work with a screenwriting technique, the Jeff Kitchen process, and he talks about what's the final image that you want on the screen, and how do you want your audience to feel when they see that final image, and that's the feeling you want your audience to leave with, and that's usually the point of the end of your film, and then working backwards to tell your story. So it's key, and it's the imagery that have been created about Black people and Black culture that has perpetuated much of this, and what the fight has been against, to be seen representatively and authentically, has whole and has having value. it's ridiculous that our humanity is not enough to give us value. We have to prove it. You know, we have to show images. You know, I was watching a documentary recently talking about, you know, just how, you know, like Smokey Robinson and the Miracles and the Four Tops, and you know, part of the reason of, you know, doing the stylized dances the way they were was to show another image of Black men as not imposing and dangerous, and to you know, to have another representation. And I think that's our job as filmmakers. You know, a large focus of my work is to create new representation and new images, because most of the mainstream images tend to be negative and skewed. And, you know, we've had periods where we've had a renaissance of new images in Black film. And I feel like we have an opportunity, you know, we have another opportunity in the last, you know, 3 to 5 years. I think there's been some powerful new images and new work that have been created. And part of what I love is that that's starting to really come to fore in the Minnesota film community in terms of the Black filmmakers. We are telling new stories and creating visual representation and new images for the time that we're in now. And so it's key.
And talk about the control of those images in terms of the importance of having an African American in charge of creating those images and putting those images out.
Well, you know, what's the saying? The lion tells the story, the victor tells the story. You know, who controls the final output or the final manifestation of the image is really the one telling the story. You know, and so it's important that you have that has a creator and has an artist. It's important to have that control. And you know, often when there isn't someone of the community or of the culture to create those images, they're skewed. You know, I'm originally from Liberia. I believe there's one documentary that has been done by a Liberian about Liberia. So what are all the documentaries about Liberia? They're all about the Civil War and all about the violence and all about the atrocities that happened during the Civil War. That's 14 years out of a history of hundreds of years, you know? And so it's always outsiders that are coming in to create the documentaries about Liberia, and they're shaping the story of Liberia. Liberians don't often there's not a film industry in Liberia. It's gone through, there's been television and it's gone through ups and downs, and right now, you know, the resources aren't there to really have an industry. There are filmmakers there, Liberian filmmakers. In fact, there was a Liberian filmmaker that had a film in Cannes recently. And, you know, so there are filmmakers there, but there's not an industry. So most of the films about Liberia are not made by Liberians, even feature films. And so, so that gives a specific type of narrative that the wider world gets to see about Liberia, you know, and just like Minnesota, you know, a lot of people, I go to festivals, they're surprised that there's films coming, Black filmmakers coming from Minnesota. Well, one, they're surprised that Black people live in Minnesota, which is odd in the 21st century, but they're also surprised that there's a Black film community here. Why is that? Because there's no representation. There's no wider representation of it, or there's been a lack of it. You know, I mean, Laurel Avenue was huge, you know, but then that's, you know, time has passed and
A lot of time.
Yeah, Laurel Avenue was 35 years ago.
Yeah, I was on that
exactly.
crew. I
I
know.
know you were around.
Talking
I
about
know
that
you were around.
today.
I
Too
know.
long.
Exactly.
And
And so,
And that was a story about a St. Paul neighborhood with a black family at the center of the story.
Yeah.
That was shot in St. Paul.
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
And we were very intentional about everything. You know, sharing that with somebody. I'm not to interrupt, but this morning was just sharing that whole journey with a brother in New York this morning who was doing a project, and he was in awe when I broke down how intentional. But you had one of the executive the producers was Charles Dutton. You had Carl Franklin as the director.
Yep.
Craig
Franklin.
Price had a lot to do with that. I mean, and I was blessed to be able to be a part of that crew. And, you know, I was in locations, but, you know, had, you know, opportunity to say, yo, you cannot roll up in my city. And no. And I remember sitting on panels at the National Black Journalists Conference, being able to talk about the powerful process that empowered a community, making decisions about using the Black beauty supply store, Earth Beauty, and the Black cleaners, and how it took a community to a whole nother level. The little Black children in the community who looked at these people on the crew, not just the stars of the movie, but the crew that looked like them.
I want to bring Bianca in because
Yes, please, yeah.
in her introduction, one of the things that Bianca pointed out was she is intentional when she's putting together her crews that
Yes.
they look like the community at large. Bianca.
Yes. Honestly, prior to my position at SPNN, I was the district photographer for the Minneapolis Public Schools. And it became very, very powerful. And that's kind of where my photography career had started. But it became very powerful to be going into these schools and taking pictures when little Black girls, little Black boys are seeing someone that looks like them, that has a job that is not a regular, you know, run of the mill, or what they feel or what are being told that they should be, type of thing. And I was even very, very intentional with them. So if a little Black girl walked up to me and was like, hey, can I see your camera? I would kneel down to them and take it off my neck and, you know, show them the back of it and what button to hit to take a picture and stuff, because you never know how that will inspire someone. Robin has been my mentor for over 20 years now. And so it's very powerful to be intentional about bringing in those who are not at the table. And I loved Laurel Avenue. Just knowing that was happening, it was just like, what? And this is HBO. This is when like HBO was still kind of new. So it was like, wait a minute, this is really important. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, being very, very intentional about our young people seeing the opportunities there and knowing that there's many, many more options is so very important.
And then Bianca,
But when you tell about
Robin,
Bianca,
Robin,
when
hold
Bianca brought to my girls' retreat, the Loving the Skin I'm In girls' retreat, her Emmy Award for not just Black girls, but girls of all hues, to see a Black female producer with that statue, I'm getting chills. For me to bear witness to that, can you imagine what that was for those girls? See, so it's not always going to be a diversity conference or a conference about racism in film and television. It's moments and experiences like that that are transformative.
The aspirational nature of it.
Yeah.
Bianca, let me come back to you just for a moment, because you touched on sort of showing the tools of the trade to young people. What about technicians, craftspeople? What touch on the importance of having, for example, an African American producer like yourself, in terms of the way you approach a story, the authenticity of the story, uh, and the understanding of the community. What those elements are that flesh out that story in a certain way.
Oh man. Well, for me, I kind of take it from Gordon Parks. So the biggest thing was building relationships, building authentic relationships, having candid conversations with people. With my film, Rondo Beyond the Pavement, where I had about 11 youth filmmakers some hadn't touched a camera at all, but wanted to learn. And so they went through a 3-month training process of how to tell the story. But then when we went into the community and spoke with the elders, I was very, very intentional about explaining to them, you can't just walk into someone's house. It can't be like a news investigative reporter type of thing. You have to, first of all, show respect in regards to coming into an elder's home. And we had a process where we had a meal together, and the youth got to learn about what Rondo was like for them growing up. And then we had the interview, and the kids had to come up with about 23 different questions that they wanted to ask. And it was very, very powerful to see that intergenerational conversation, and really being intentional and gentle in some ways, because it's a very touchy subject about what happened to the people of Rondo. And so we were blessed.
Do you feel,
Yeah.
being an African American producer, do you bring some special insight into that?
Oh, yes.
That a person who does not have that neighborhood community experience.
Very, 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 yes,
Hear
very
a little
much
bit
so.
about that, if you would.
And cultural competence, like I said, like cultural competence. So, it may not be your grandmother, but would you walk around the house with your shoes on at your grandma's house? Those kinds of things. Would you not say hello to the people in the room? So really making sure there's cultural competencies, and I mean, that goes for everybody. But my approach is, from what I've learned from Gordon, is having those authentic relationships, meeting people where they are, walking with them, talking with them, being actually interested in what they're saying and what they're talking about, and being very mindful and careful of the story, and keeping it centered around that person and not trying to do extra, right? So it's very, very, very important.
Excellent. We've touched on Gordon Parks, the legacy of Gordon Parks. I hope most Minnesotans know that Gordon Parks, while working on the trains, he grew up in Kansas, and while working on the trains, he came up the river to St. Paul, and he was interested in still photography, and he got his amazing start when a St. Paul business owner who had a storefront, Gordon Parks asked him whether he would be willing to let him photograph some models for his store. And and thankfully the store owner, and Robin, if I'm wrong, join in on this, but he let him take a picture. I think he only took one frame, I think, in his telling of this.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful that launched Gordon Parks's opportunity to become a still photographer. And of course, he went on to be a legendary still photographer with Life magazine, and obviously the filmmaker who did The Learning Tree, the story of a young African American boy is coming into manhood in Kansas, and this beautiful elegy of this life in this pastoral setting. and the conflicts that he had as an African-American boy becoming a man in that time. And of course, in Shaft, and, you know, I mean, what a gift to Minnesota.
Mhm. Well, I think Bianca so beautifully. So I was smiling. And I think that's the power when we instill our history, the history of our ancestors in our young people. I just sat here, it's like I was listening to myself when I have tried to honor my uncle and keeping my promise to him when I journeyed with him, and my last visit with him in New York when we had a solemn visit, and he gave me instructions, and he looked at me and said, "Baby, what's going to happen to Black boys? What did I really do?" And I made the promise living would not be in vain. But while he was even living, and he would make visits here, and he would sit on panels with members of Don't Believe the Hype, and spend time with members of Don't Believe the Hype, and impart that wisdom. So to hear you, Bianca, knowing that learning stuck, right? But the part of his life here in St. Paul, even before even thinking about going to Frank Murphy's, was him as a boy coming from Kansas, and being homeless on the streets of St. Paul and Minneapolis, and living and staying in the pool halls and just trying to survive before even discovering the camera as a weapon, is what captivates the young people here, knowing that he once struggled like I struggled, but he had a vision. And we can tell these young people, you have a vision, like a Gordon Parks or a Van or E.G. or Bianca or Miss Robin.
Robin, let me interrupt you just a minute. Robin,
that they know he did, so they can. And so that's what's so powerful, and that's what we have here. These are the gifts, you know, that Black Lives Matter, not just when we have a tragedy. I heard a sister on Minnesota National Public Radio say that the other day. Our Black lives have to matter beyond when we have a tragedy, right? That's what we have to impart with folks. That our
Robin,
Black
hey, Robin, you had mentioned, and I want to give former film board head Craig Rice a little bit of a shout out for his film based on your uncle's life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in that there was a mention of a choice of weapons that you just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Just talk a little bit about choice of weapons being a camera, being something more more deadly, like a gun.
Yeah. Uncle Gordon often talked about shooting my camera proved to be more powerful than shooting a gun.
That visual imagery that he created.
Absolutely, but also his piano, you know, also his paintbrush, you know. So, and he truly believed that, and it often did. He tells the story of riding with the Black Panthers and doing his story on the Black Panthers and being in the car with them and the police following them and then getting in kind of a little conflict, and him sharing with the Panthers, if we get out of this situation, you know, and I get my story in Life magazine, my camera will prove to be more powerful than your gun. And that was the case, and he proved to be right. And
powerful.
So he you know, in young people, and we've done this work at Gordon Parks High School, where we have a Gordon Parks legacy class, and every new student that comes to the school they take that class, and then they feel it. We take students from the scholars to Fort Scott, Kansas, to stand at his gravesite, and students look up and say, "Mr. Parks, thanks for saving my life." We put young people on airplanes to go to New York. They walk in his footsteps. And so his living is not in vain. And one of my students asked, well, if Mr. Parks were to ask me that today, Miss Robin, what would you tell them? Tell him, I'd say, Uncle Gordon, they're going to be fine because they're walking in your footsteps. And so it's real, and it's working. And so again, our lives have to matter beyond the tragedies. And we're here to tell them. I know we used to, at TPT, we used to recruit young brothers from Red Wing Correctional Facility who were incarcerated, while incarcerated, basked in the legacy of Uncle Gordon. But when they would leave Red Wing, they would come and become a part of Don't Believe the Hype. So walking through the halls of TPT, they were on their way to edit segments of the evening news show versus being the subjects of the evening news show.
Okay,
Understand what I'm saying? That
absolutely.
matters, right?
I think the topic really is emerging is the power of the visual image, who controls it, and why it's important to have a diverse, inclusive group of producers, trained craftspeople in the industry, because of the authenticity of the stories that will emerge if we have that.
That's
I
right.
remember Spike Lee, my mentor, talking about a scene in The Godfather. And Francis Ford Coppola, you know, wrote this brilliantly, really out of Mario Puzo. But there was a scene where, you know, all of the guys are in the kitchen waiting to find out what happened to, you know, the father, you know, and played by Marlon Brando. And there's a point where Coppola, directing the film, directed, you know, one of the actors to go over to the pot that was simmering on the stove of the tomato sauce for the spaghetti that they were making, with the meatballs and the garlic and all this. And he dips a piece of bread into the sauce. Now that wasn't in the screenplay. I mean, that was a cultural note that occurred to Coppola when he was, you know, in the process of making the film and shooting the scene, and because he came up with that from something from his experience in life. That, yeah, that's what you would just do. You would dip that piece of bread in that sauce, and just those little new things.
That's right.
Say a world. Melodie, we've got some slides that I'd like us to put up now, and then I'd like us, you know, just to see some of the disparities in Minnesota that exist. You know, like I think we touched on the sense of Minnesota exceptionalism. But let's look at these slides for a minute and just have a look at these.
Yeah. Let's see here. What we wanted to do was really give folks who may not be familiar with some of these things, who do believe, as we all do in this sort of Minnesota exceptionalism, you know, Minnesota has some problems. There are incredible disparities. We are not in really good shape when it comes to issues like income inequality, which you'll see some numbers here. And by the way, I will, after the webinar, I will be sending out to everyone who's registered an email with links and sources and statistics and further reading. So you'll have all of this. Then when you look at unemployment numbers, again, Black unemployment compared to white, more than 3 times the white unemployment rate here in the state. 4 times the rate of poverty, Black folks here in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities area. And then, of course, incarceration, 11 times. Black folks are 11 times more likely to be incarcerated than white people here in the Twin Cities. And this is something that a lot of folks may know in terms of our education disparities. We in Minnesota have one of the worst achievement gaps between Blacks and whites. We rank dead last in the country when it comes to racial disparities in graduation rates. And then home ownership. And I can't emphasize enough, and I will send this out to everyone, one of the things that has contributed to this, in addition to racial covenants, redlining, is some of the just horrible urban planning projects that happened that Bianca so brilliantly laid out in her documentary, that happened here in the Rondo neighborhood. So that's another one. And then if you want to look at the production industry, I think I just have a couple of things from the UCLA's study. But if you look at directors of theatrically released films, only 1.5 out of 10 film directors are people of color. And the same holds true, even worse, for writers. And I think that the next slide and the last slide is really what is really key here. And that is that look at who's in power, who's making the decision about who the directors and writers are going to be. And they, you know, studio and agency heads, film executives, it's almost exclusively white and male. So, you know, when you have that, when you have those kinds of numbers and you start with sort of the shared knowledge, that, as Ava DuVernay said recently, everybody knows there's a problem. So let's start there. And, you know, if, as Jefferson's character says in Hamilton, if you don't know, now you know. So where do we go from here is I think next.
Yeah, I think that's a very good transition. I know Ken Rance, who's one of our participants, asked, wants to make sure that we're talking about where we are in terms of a diverse workforce for craft folks that want to work here at home instead of going off to LA, New York, Atlanta, wherever. And how do we boost the numbers? How do we make the change in the hiring process and the identifying the talented, capable, qualified folks out here? Bianca, do you want to address that a little bit?
Well, at least with St. Paul Neighborhood Network, because we're community based, we like to also train. So there's opportunities for people to learn. So there's lots of people who may have never touched a camera or never been in a studio space. They can come to SPNN and actually learn. Lots of workshops, lots of classes, and all those kinds of things. The cool thing is they have an opportunity to freelance once they've done it for a while and feel comfortable. We have hired some of the people who went all the way from being a volunteer on shoots and learning, becoming freelancers, and going on to get more skills or more education in that background. And so it really is about opening it up to a community and others that just don't look like the norm. And so, and again, it's
Bianca, if you would talk about, you mentioned in your introduction that you were 14 years old when you went.
I was 14 years old. So
how did that come about? What happened?
Okay, so my best friend, who is still my best friend of 25 years, we are Miss Robin's nieces at this point. Always have been. But my best friend grew up in St. Paul, and she had heard about Don't Believe the Hype, and they were having this amazing kickoff. They were bringing the show back for another season. And she was like, I really think you might like this. You should come with me to go check it out. And when I went in there and saw all the lights, all the cameras, everyone being excited about all of it, it truly, truly changed my life. And I basically said, that's what I want to do. And from that day forward, I was focused on, okay, we gotta finish high school. We're gonna stay connected. We're gonna, go to St. Cloud State.
What was that magic thing that happened when you were on the set You saw the operation. What was that seed that flourished in you?
Well, a part of it was, first of all, seeing people who look like me, in regards to Don't Believe the Hype as far as the talent, seeing Robin, seeing Dan, and they are the producers. And so, you know, I'm an 80s baby. So this is around the time where Oprah was kind of getting some traction. I was fascinated with Oprah as a kid and stuff. And so seeing all these different people in these different roles that I had never seen before, right? Because we're only seeing them as talent. You're not seeing them as producers or crew and all that kind of stuff. And so something about seeing people of color in technical stuff, because I'm a tech geek. I was always been a tech geek. So seeing people pushing buttons and moving knobs and stuff like a spaceship, that was fascinating for me.
You know, I'm so enthusiastic about your story. You know, I hope the participants listening in relate to this, because this, in whatever field you're in, this spark of genius, of inspiration, of aspiration.
Yeah.
This is what these kids are out here. These are our kids. These are Minnesota kids that want the opportunities, that need the opportunities, that are totally willing to put in the work to develop the craftsmanship to become professionals in the industry.
But Bianca didn't just do, but she didn't just then leave and then go become a producer. She went and then poured into young people. See, that's what's important. She went and paid it forward. You know, that's, you know, so she said, Dan, let's say, shout out to Dan Bergen, but it was the vision before I got to TPT was Dan Bergen. And Susan Robeson, for young people of color to come in and walk with the granddaughter of Paul Robeson, the great niece of Gordon Parks. Come on. Yeah. It was divine for such a time as that, and now such a time as this, that these young people walk with Bianca Rhodes. This is something. And so we better do something with this. But she didn't just say, oh, I got the skills and my girl Essence Jones, and we're going to just do our thing and just keep it moving. It is about each one reach one, each one teach one. That's what makes it work. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's not just about me being bad and all of that. We got to snatch up our babies and have them walk with us. That's the formula we have to be committed to.
Absolutely. E.g., I want to bring you in on this. Sometimes there's an awkwardness of people, let's say white people. They may want to help, they may want to offer opportunities, but there may be this awkwardness, this ill-at-easeness of, well, I don't want to be the white do-gooder. But what's been your experience with being willing to accept help, training, guidance from those people that have those skills? How's that affected your experience?
I'm not sure. Can you clarify?
People who have reached out to you, either black or white, but there's a sense of education and teaching. I think there's a certain sense sometimes that white people will feel they have something to contribute, they have something to offer, but they're reluctant, they hold back because they don't want to be seen as some kind of white do-gooder who's imposing something or on someone who might not be interested in accepting that training. Have you had any experience with that?
No, I mean, most of my mentors,
or Crystal Lake or anywhere.
Most of my mentors have been black, you know, especially in the Twin Cities, and I mean, for me, the power of the Minnesota community, the Minnesota Black community, is many of the elders and mentors, they don't take no shorts. You know, they're very real, very authentic, very straightforward. And, you know, like Robin said, they often put you in the driver's seat. You know, they put you in the position to do the thing that needs to be done so that you learn what needs to be done. I mean, that's the privilege that I've had, from Marion McClinton to Lori Carlos, Craig Rice, Carolyn Holbrook, you know, all these people. You know, I often think back and you know, think, why? What did they see in me? But they poured so much into me by putting me in a position of leadership, by putting me in the position to do the work that needed to be done. Ani Sabare, you know, he taught me how to write grants. We had a Black Male Performance Collective, and we needed funding. And he said, "Who wants to write grants?" I raised my hand, and he said, "Okay, I'll teach you how to write grants." And then he gave me the grant, said, "Go write it."
That's great.
I wrote it, brought it back, he tore it up, said, "Go write it again." And I kept writing it till I got it right. And then we submitted it, and he did that 7 times. And, you know, we ended up getting 3 of the grants, but that's how I learned to write grants. And J. Otis Powell, he, you know, said, "I'm working on a radio show and I'm looking for an engineer. Do you want to engineer?" And I had done radio in college, but I was a host, not an engineer. So I took the training at KFAI, and I became the engineer for the show. And I worked on that show for, good Lord, for about 5-6 years. Yeah, and so, I mean, that's it. Lori Carlos, she made me a co-curator, and that's how I learned curation. And so that's what most of my mentorship have been like in the Twin Cities. In terms of,
Excellent. I just want to touch on Maya Washington. You know, also has done a lot with the grant process and the money that's available here when she was, you know, developing her film about her father's brilliant career, Gene Washington. Robin, let me ask you, what about, you know, this is the center of probably more Fortune 500 companies than any place outside of New York City, probably. We've got 20 some, 18 to 20 Fortune 500 companies here, you know, per capita. That's a huge amount. The Targets, the Best Buys, all of the Carmichael Lynch, all of these advertising agencies. How do we share, how do we get these huge corporations who have these huge philanthropic programs to invest and to develop artists, craftspeople, directors, producers of color? You've had some experience with this. What's been your experience?
I'm gonna say this first. Family, let us come together with a quickness, especially for such a time as this. Out of this tragedy, family, let us meet up. Let us come together and get our strategy, our family business together, and get our plan together, because from this tragedy, the philanthropic community is knowing. Let's look at all of the grants that are out right now, talking about we got to address the, as my kids say, the Rona crisis. They say Rona. They can't say Corona, COVID. The Rona.
That Rona gonna get you.
Right. The racial justice dollars are there. So let's come together, family, and come up with the family plan, the solid family plan. Let's deal with, there's an African proverb, he who conceals the disease cannot expect to be cured. So let's come back and do the family healing, whatever that means, and come up with that solid family plan, right? and work it out so that we have that collective plan, so that we have that collective, right? So that we know, oh, I got this one. And so we come together and do it solid. That's me. Anybody else might have a different, that's what I'm saying. Because you know what? I know that community very, very, very well.
Well, and I
I
think
know it well. And they're right now are looking and they're doing the funding, but I want us to get the maximum out of it.
and I
Go ahead,
think
E.G.
you know, we're in the process right now of planning a Black Filmmakers Town Hall to do that,
Yes,
to have that conversation.
absolutely.
One of the things that, you know, I'm working on a history of the Black film community in Minnesota, and as I was, you know, prepping the information to send out, I think surprisingly, against people's expectation, there are more Black filmmakers doing work right now than I have known or been accustomed to in Minnesota, and I think that comes from the investment that has been put into the community and the next generation, and that needs to continue to be put in. You know, but there's more of us there, and we are more active than probably we've ever been, and it's a time for us to come together, and that's, you know, part of why we started working on the Black Film and Men initiative, and to try to connect and network and bring the community together, even if it's just acknowledging who is in the network and who is doing the work. And so it's true that is the critical next step. And what is required is a shifting of the paradigm or the resources. You know, one of the biggest hurdles is, you know, Ken also asked the question about, you know, employment strategies for Black production professionals. You know, there are a lack of those opportunities. So as a filmmaker, you don't have the opportunity to make an income that allows you to be able to, one, sustain yourself, but also be able to do work. In addition to that, so there's a lack of employment opportunities, both for crew and for creatives. And on top of that, the funding is often weighed to white institutions, white filmmakers. And so so Black filmmakers have a double, I guess, a double hill or a double hurdle that has to be overcome, which is why a lot of Black professional filmmakers end up leaving town. You know, they have to go to other places. They have to go search out other opportunities because those are limited here. You know, I am fighting against the idea that you have to leave town in order to be
I agree. That's
successful. Right. And it's a struggle, you know. I have, you know, people may think that I've received a lot of grants in order to do my film. I've only received one grant,
right,
and one McKnight, you know, but most of our film productions have been out of pocket, you know, and you have to learn how to turn 15 cents into $1.
Well, I want to. I just want to reference Nataki Garrett's film that Dame Jasmine was in. She was the lead in, called what is it?
North Loop.
North Loop. Excuse me. Thank you. That was a very much a labor of love. They worked on the script for a long period of time. The film's now making the rounds in the film festival world, but it's a great story. It's basically an African American Mary Tyler Moore show, two lead African American women walking through the North Loop, sharing their experiences, and they get confronted by a guy in a car who cuts them off, and then they have this interaction. It's labor of love, but what's great, at least, are the basic resources are here to be able to do that. It is a heavy lift, though. I know it's 1:03. I'd like to take at least 5 more minutes. And Melodie, do we have any other questions that we want to open up to from any of our participants that we have covered?
Yeah, we have a couple of folks talked about something which is so pervasive in Minnesota, which is that in production, people tend to hire who they know,
Yes.
and who they've worked with before. So what can, or again, this is something that I've heard since I started this job, when asked about why there are no people of color on a crew, being told, well, there aren't any who do that. Well, we know that's not true. That's just not true. So what can folks who are in the position to hire, or even on crew, how can they help that change? How can we?
Let me ask it this way, Melodie. Would it be possible to assemble a list of African American and people of color technicians, crew people that the film board could have as a reference and put on the film board's website, so that anyone looking for crew members, anyone from a PA, I know Trevor Lawrence is the head of the theatrical Teamsters here, member of the board, to drivers, to directors of photography, directors, producers. Would that be a possibility? E.G., you had something on that?
And I say even a step further. Why don't we support Black Film and Men in creating a website and listing all those Black filmmakers and filmmakers of color, which is, and I'm saying this because that's our plan, you know. But we're doing it on our own, you know. But yes, so there's support that's needed organizationally, and support that's needed for artists to do their work. And identification of a community is one of the first steps. Knowing who is in your community, knowing what they do and what they're good at, and knowing how they can be reached. Those are critical. And in this moment, there should be support for Black folks doing it themselves, and to have the resources to be able to put that up. And then they can go to Black Film and Men directly to find out those resources, because then it's sustaining. Because then if you support the organization, then the organization can continue to do the networking, which then will grow the organization and help to create more opportunities.
I think that's fantastic, but I also think that with the Minnesota Film and TV Board being the central clearinghouse for the state of Minnesota for any production that's either here already or that wants to bring, a production here to shoot, I think that's having that central distribution place is so important. I think Black Film and MN would coordinate with the film board. I don't think there's any problem with having two different websites or whatever with the lists and everything of who's qualified and how to contact people. But I do think that to have as much reach as possible, so that if it's HBO calling from Los Angeles, saying, hey, we're going to bring a series here, and we are conscious about inclusion and diversity, who do you got in these positions?
So
I think
it helps the out-of-state production company by not having to bring folks in, travel them in. We've got the homegrown crews here, and we have to share, and we have to share the names.
I
Bianca?
think it's important.
Go ahead,
I think it's important for our organization to support and amplify those voices, because Van is right. You know, it just because we are the de facto state film office, we are the first stop for a lot of folks from out of the state. And if we can make this information available, and you know, then I think that that's a really great start. There are so many things I want to say, but yeah, I'll just.
And I just want to, let me just give you my own personal experience. Having been from here, having known about the film board and the Snowbait rebate, you know, there was a film that a producer friend of mine and I were doing together called The Inheritance. And, yes. And that we eventually shot in Stillwater, Minnesota. But originally, the other producer, Effie Brown, was thinking about shooting in New Mexico. I said, no. This is a movie about a Black family that comes together in the dead of winter, and things go off the rails. But within one day's call to the film board, we had the director, the producer, and the DP on a flight to Minneapolis that the film board covered. Within, you know, and working with Jim Craven, magnificent local actor here and producer, working with him, they found the perfect location in Stillwater. We brought the film here with Golden Brooks, D.B. Woodside, Keith David, and it's, you know, and we shot the film entirely in Minnesota. We did some pickups in LA, you know, 8 months later or whatever before the film came out. But that was because, you know, I was aware of what resources were available here, and we needed snow. So we went directly to the film board, and that's how that film got done here. And as a result, the same thing with the film version of Dear White People. Effie and I had already done The Inheritance, you know, 2-3 years before. When Dear White People came up, we needed colleges, university setting. Hey, Minneapolis, we've got it.
Ben, what did the crew look like? What did the crew look like? Were you able?
We had a deliberate effort to do outreach. So our AD department, it was myself, Elaine Wood, African American woman. Also, Kelly Robb was our makeup artist, and we discovered that, because there wasn't, we were able to get, we were always on the outreach to find folks. And through Jim Craven and Lucinda Winter, who was the former head of the film board, we reached out to them, and we put together, a somewhat diverse crew.
Right. Yeah.
I really want to add something that's very, very important. A lot of this is the lack of access and unions.
Yes.
Commercial situations have unions. No one is telling Black folks or other people of color how to even be on a union, or what do they need to have, what kind of certifications they need to have, any of that kind of stuff.
Bianca, I think you just teed up. Bianca, I think you just teed up probably one of the next town halls.
Absolutely.
Lined up, but I think that's a wonderful topic. We can get Trevor Lawrence on there. I was a former, very active Directors Guild member myself. I'd be happy to participate on that process, and anyone who has any questions about that, I'd be very happy.
Wonderful. It would be great to have relationships as far as the Minnesota Black Film organization, to have relationships with some of these important people that can help with that process, because then that allows those opportunities to be on those commercial sets, because that's not happening. So
absolutely.
I mean, to me, it to sort of synthesize, it's about the support for the development of a Black filmmaking organization or entity. And within that, to have a training process within that, you know, similar to what was happening with Don't Believe the Hype, similar to what's happening at SPNN. We're working on an initiative called Black Film Forward. That's a filmmaking lab. You know, have opportunities like that where there can be learning and opportunities for Black filmmakers and Black film community to grow. And then also that once there, then it's about the partnerships with the film board, with
Right.
other entities. And then eventually, I mean, it's not going to happen instantaneously, but eventually those relationships will develop and people will start to know, okay, there's this Black film organization to go to if you're interested in finding Black creatives in Minnesota in the filmmaking community. You know, that'll take some time, but the resources have to be put into there. And then the investment has to be put into the education of the next generation and the support of professionals now to continue to grow. Because just in the way that you know, Gordon was able to excel, Van, you've been able to excel in the industry, Ken, Craig, you know, there are many Black filmmakers from here that have excelled and you know, went higher within the industry. That is also important, you know. Seeing people like that gave me the confidence that it's possible to do the work from here. And you know, my interest is to do the work from here, but stay here.
Stay here.
and not have to move.
And that is one of the primary goals of building up the Minnesota Film and TV Board. That's the only reason the board exists, to grow production here, to be an asset to filmmakers that want to film here and want to work here.
And if I could just say, you know, the work that EG is doing is spectacular. But one thing that I want, that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think that every arts organization, nonprofit that is currently under white leadership needs to be thinking about is transition planning. You know, when are some of these leaders going to step aside and let Black folks take their rightful place? So, you know, while it's great to create a Black Film Minnesota, why is there not a Black executive director of Minnesota Film and TV? So, you know, I just want to put that out there. But I think that that's something that organizations ought to be thinking about right now.
Absolutely.
I think it's not an either or, because I head up an initiative at the Ordway, Taking Our Place Center Stage. Okay, hey, and I want to see a Penumbra thrive, and I want to see an Ordway thrive, because it's not an either or. Right. Because my mother raised us to take our rightful place in every institution of art and culture and history, because she said, I pay taxes and my tax dollars pay for those places too. So my children have a right to experience it all. So it is not an either or, but I want to see us have the jobs so that we have the dollars to invest in it, invest in ours. We need some FUBU right now. And I think there's a sense of urgency right now. And we are in a moment in history right now where the philanthropic community is looking and saying, hey, They've got the resources, and it's a sense of urgency. Let's tap into them. Let's come together, family. Let's get our strategy down. Just say, I got this front over here. Okay, brother, I got this front over here. Okay, sister, I got this front over here. Let's go back to some old school strategizing, right? Let's come together and let's do this. There is a sense of urgency.
Well,
Film,
I'm certainly willing to join in, partner with everyone.
Okay.
But I do want to echo what Melodie said. I think it's important, this notion that you are in an environment where you have developed people that might not look like you, and it doesn't have to be your nephew every time who gets that next promotion,
Oh,
who gets
yes.
that next job, because just as it's important, as Bianca was pointing out, to have the craftspeople, the producers that have a cultural sensitivity and awareness, we bring a lot to the game. It's not some kind of charity, whether it's jazz music and Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith and Jelly Roll Morton, or whether it's hip hop, what
Black
we
culture
do
is
we
American
always
culture.
bring the
So
creative. We always bring the creative, and the entire country, the entire society is the beneficiary of that. With that, I'd like, if everyone wants to take just 1 minute to wrap up. Melody, do we have any other questions that we haven't addressed?
There's some great conversation going on, and I will share that with everyone via email afterwards, because we've gone way over time. So just everyone look for email with links and more information.
All right, then let me just go to thanking the panel. Melody, obviously I want to thank you for putting this panel together in the Minnesota Film and Television Board. Bianca Rhodes, producer, production manager, awesome. E.G. Bailey, what a pleasure. This is the first time I think we've actually had a chance to share this much time together. And Robin, Robin Hickman-Winfield.
that's right.
I want to thank you all for your participation, and the participants that are on the conference. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.